30 seconds of video showing Vanessa Reynolds being dragged down the airplane aisle destroyed everything. Blood dripped from her forehead onto her designer suit as smartphone cameras captured her screams. Tomorrow she was supposed to sign a $5 billion deal with this very airline, not anymore. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this kind of corporate injustice makes your blood boil, hit that like button right now and subscribe to stay informed about similar cases of discrimination in America. The story I'm about to share will make you question everything you thought you knew about how far we've come as a society. Vanessa Reynolds wasn't born into privilege. Growing up in South Chicago's toughest neighborhood, she witnessed firsthand the struggles of her community. Her mother, Darlene, worked 3 jobs simultaneously: morning shifts at a hospital cafeteria, afternoon cleaning at a downtown office building, and weekend hours at a 24-hour convenience store. All this sacrifice had one purpose: ensuring her brilliant daughter received the education she deserved. From an early age, Vanessa displayed extraordinary aptitude for mathematics and computer science. By 12, she was creating simple programs on a second-hand computer her mother had purchased with 6 months of saved tips. Her teachers noticed her exceptional abilities and recommended her for a scholarship program at West Ridge Academy, an elite private school that rarely accepted students from her neighborhood. Westridge became Vanessa's first battlefield in a war she didn't ask to fight. Despite scoring highest on entrance exams, she faced constant questioning of her abilities. Teachers expressed surprise at her test scores. Peers excluded her from study groups, and administrators scrutinized her work with unusual intensity. During her sophomore year, a math teacher accused her of cheating after she solved an advanced calculus problem using an innovative approach. It took 3 separate meetings and her mother taking unpaid time off work before the school acknowledged their error. "That moment taught me something essential," Vanessa would later tell graduates at her alma mater, MIT. "Intelligence isn't enough when the system is designed to doubt you. You must be undeniable." Undeniable she became. Vanessa graduated as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to MIT, and completed both her undergraduate and master's degrees in computer science within 4 years. Her thesis on predictive security algorithms caught the attention of several major tech companies, and she accepted a position at Global Tech, one of Silicon Valley's fastest-growing firms. At Global Tech, the pattern continued. Despite consistently outperforming her colleagues, Vanessa's ideas were frequently attributed to others in meetings. Male peers with less experience received promotions she was told to wait for. The microaggressions were constant, from comments about being articulate to suggestions she was hired to check a diversity box. The breaking point came after 6 years at Global Tech. After developing a security protocol that saved the company millions, Vanessa was passed over for promotion to Chief Technology Officer. The position went to David Lancaster, a white male colleague who had often sought her help understanding technical concepts. During the announcement, the CEO praised Lancaster's natural leadership qualities and cultural fit. That evening, Vanessa cleared out her desk. 3 months later, she founded RevTech with her savings and a small investment from her former professor. Her vision: creating next-generation security systems that could predict and prevent breaches before they occurred. The technology she developed was revolutionary, combining artificial intelligence with behavioral analysis to identify threats that traditional systems missed. Within 5 years, RevTech grew from a startup operating out of Vanessa's apartment to a company valued at over $2 billion. Major corporations across industries sought her security solutions, impressed by both their effectiveness and efficiency. Banks reported 87% reduction in fraud attempts. Government agencies improved their threat detection by 93%. RevTech's reputation became synonymous with excellence. Throughout this rise, Vanessa maintained a management style described as tough but scrupulously fair. She demanded excellence but rewarded it generously. Her company became known for its diverse workforce and inclusive culture. While only 4% of tech CEOs were Black women, Vanessa used her position to mentor others and create pathways for underrepresented groups in the industry. When Skyline Airlines approached RevTech about implementing a comprehensive security overhaul for their global operations, It represented the largest potential contract in the company's history. The $5 billion deal would involve securing everything from their booking systems to physical airport infrastructure across 43 countries. For 3 months, Vanessa personally led negotiations with Skyline executives. The pressure was immense, not just for her company but for what this deal represented. Success would firmly establish that a Black-owned, woman-led company could handle contracts of this magnitude, potentially opening doors throughout the industry. The night before boarding Skyline Flight 1382 from San Francisco to Chicago, Vanessa reviewed the final contract revisions until 3 in the morning. Tomorrow's meeting with Skyline's executive team would finalize details before the formal signing ceremony scheduled for the following day. After years of fighting to prove herself in rooms where she was the only person who looked like her, this deal would be the undeniable validation of everything she had built. Little did she know that the very airline preparing to entrust her with their security would fail to treat her with basic human dignity during a 90-minute flight. The morning of May 17th dawned clear and bright over San Francisco. Vanessa woke after barely 3 hours of sleep, her mind already racing through final presentation points for the afternoon meeting in Chicago. She packed efficiently, her navy designer suit and cream silk blouse laid carefully in her carry-on, her briefcase containing the annotated contract draft and her laptop. For the flight, she chose comfortable but professional attire: tailored black pants, a burgundy cashmere sweater, and low heels. Arriving at San Francisco International Airport 2 hours early, Vanessa moved through security with practiced efficiency. Her RevTech team had arranged a private car to meet her at O'Hare and confirmed her reservation at the Peninsula Hotel. Nothing was left to chance. This deal was too important. Skyline Airlines had been specific about wanting to establish a partnership based on trust, so Vanessa had deliberately booked their airline for this trip despite her usual preference for a competitor. She'd even paid for a first-class ticket personally rather than charging it to her company account, a small gesture to demonstrate her commitment to the relationship. At the gate, she responded to urgent emails and took a brief call from her legal team about minor language adjustments to Section 47B of the contract. The exhaustion of weeks working 18-hour days had accumulated, but adrenaline kept her focused. After this deal closed, she promised herself a long-overdue vacation. When boarding began, Vanessa was among the first passengers called. She presented her ticket to the gate agent who smiled and welcomed her aboard. Walking down the jet bridge, she mentally rehearsed key talking points for tomorrow's signing ceremony. The flight attendant at the aircraft door greeted her warmly, checked her boarding pass, and directed her to her seat in first class. 2A, a window seat on the left side. Vanessa stowed her briefcase under the seat in front of her and settled in, immediately opening her tablet to review presentation slides. The cabin gradually filled with other passengers. About 10 minutes before scheduled departure, a commotion near the front of the cabin caught her attention. A tall, gray-haired white man in an expensive suit stood in the aisle beside her row, frowning at his boarding pass and then at her. This was Thomas Whitfield, though Vanessa had no way of knowing he sat on Skyline's board of directors. They had never been introduced during negotiations, as he had deliberately avoided meetings with RevTech representatives. "I believe you're in my seat," Whitfield stated without greeting or introduction. Vanessa looked up from her tablet. "I don't think so. I'm in 2A. That's my seat. I always sit in 2A on this route." Vanessa calmly reached for her boarding pass. "I understand, but my ticket is for this seat. See? 2A. Whitfield's face hardened. Rather than checking his own boarding pass again, he signaled to a passing flight attendant, Carol Matthews, a blonde woman in her mid-40s who had been with Skyline for 17 years. "There seems to be a seating mix-up," Whitfield said, his tone suggesting the mistake couldn't possibly be his. Carol barely glanced at Vanessa before addressing Whitfield. "What seems to be the problem, sir?" "This woman is sitting in my seat." Vanessa held up her boarding pass. "My ticket is for 2A. I'm happy to let you check it." Carol glanced at Vanessa's ticket with obvious skepticism. "Let me see your boarding pass, sir," she said to Whitfield. Upon examination, his pass clearly showed seat 7C, in economy. Rather than apologizing, Carol frowned. "There must be some mistake. Mr. Whitfield is one of our frequent flyers. Nevertheless, Vanessa said politely but firmly, I purchased this seat and have the boarding pass confirming it. By now, other passengers were watching the interaction. Some had begun filming with their phones, sensing the unusual tension between a flight attendant seemingly advocating for a white passenger over a black woman with valid documentation. Carol's demeanor shifted from professional to cold. Perhaps we can check your ID again? Sometimes there are misunderstandings. The implication was clear, and several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Vanessa maintained her composure, presenting both her ID and boarding pass again. There's no misunderstanding. I'm in my assigned seat. Whitfield remained standing in the aisle, creating a bottleneck for other boarding passengers. Instead of directing him to his actual seat, Carol asked, Would you be willing to move to another seat? Mr. Whitfield prefers this location. I'm sorry, but no, Vanessa replied, her tone still professional but firmer. I specifically booked this seat because I need to work during the flight. I have an important meeting immediately after landing. Carol's lips thinned. I see. She turned to Whitfield. Sir, let me check if we have another first-class seat available for you. As Carol walked away, Whitfield remained standing beside Vanessa's row, staring down at her with undisguised contempt. Vanessa returned to her tablet, attempting to defuse the situation by redirecting her attention to work. Several minutes passed before Carol returned, not with a solution but with two air marshals, James Donovan and Peter Keller. Rather than addressing the actual issue, Carol immediately presented her biased version of events. This passenger is refusing to cooperate with crew instructions, she informed the marshals, gesturing toward Vanessa. Vanessa looked up in genuine shock. That's absolutely untrue. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. The gentleman was mistaken about his seat assignment. Air Marshal Donovan, a broad-shouldered man with a military haircut, positioned himself beside Vanessa's seat. Ma'am, flight attendants have authority on aircraft. You need to comply with their instructions. I am complying, Vanessa explained, struggling to maintain her composure in the face of this escalating absurdity. I purchased this specific seat. I have the boarding pass confirming it. I've done nothing wrong. She's being disruptive, Carol interjected. Several passengers have complained. This was a blatant fabrication, and several nearby passengers began objecting. That's not true, said an elderly woman across the aisle. She's been perfectly polite. Ignoring these contradictions, Donovan leaned closer to Vanessa. You have two options. Move to the seat we assign you in economy, or deplane immediately. Vanessa took a deep breath, aware that as a black woman, showing any anger would only reinforce stereotypes and potentially worsen the situation. I'd like to speak with your supervisor, please. This is discriminatory treatment. The moment the word discriminatory left her lips, Donovan's expression hardened. That's it. You're deplaning. On what grounds? Vanessa asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Interfering with crew member duties, Carol said triumphantly. The situation had spiraled beyond reason. Passengers throughout the cabin were now openly filming, sensing they were witnessing something profoundly unjust. Among them, 23-year-old Zora Williams, a recent journalism graduate seated several rows back, made sure her phone captured everything clearly. I need to get my briefcase, Vanessa said, reaching toward the bag containing tomorrow's $5 billion contract revisions. You'll get your belongings after you're off the aircraft, Donovan stated, signaling to Keller. Before Vanessa could respond, both air marshals moved in. What happened next would be viewed millions of times across the world within hours. Let me ask you something. If you witnessed someone being physically removed from a plane despite having a valid ticket, would you intervene or just record it on your phone? Comment number 1 if you would speak up, and hit that like button if, you believe airlines need to be held accountable for discriminatory treatment. Now let's see how this shocking situation unfolded. Air Marshal Donovan grabbed Vanessa's left arm while Keller seized her right. The sudden force caught her off guard, pulling her halfway out of her seat before she could even process what was happening. Vanessa's natural reaction, tensing against this unexpected physical contact, was immediately interpreted as resistance. "Stop resisting," Donovan barked, though security footage would later confirm she had done nothing of the sort. "I'm not resisting," Vanessa responded, her voice rising with justified alarm. "I'm asking you to let me walk out on my own." Instead of allowing her this dignity, the marshals tightened their grip. Passengers gasped as they witnessed the disproportionate force being used against a woman who had remained calm throughout. The confrontation. "This is unnecessary," called out a businessman from across the aisle. "She wasn't causing any problems." The marshals ignored all protests. As they yanked Vanessa fully from her seat, her head struck the overhead compartment with an audible thud. The impact disoriented her momentarily and knocked her designer glasses askew. When Donovan jerked her forward again, the glasses snapped, a fragment cutting into her forehead. Blood immediately began trickling down Vanessa's face. The sight of crimson droplets splashing onto her burgundy sweater caused several passengers to cry out in alarm. A child began crying. An off-duty nurse in row 4 stood up, offering assistance, but was ordered to remain seated. "She's bleeding," Zora Williams called out, her phone steady as she documented everything. "She needs medical attention." "Mind your business," Keller snapped in Zora's direction. "And put that phone away." Zora did not comply. "I have every right to record this." Meanwhile, Vanessa's legs buckled as the marshals dragged her forward. Her heel caught on a seat edge, causing her shoe to come off. The indignity compounded as they continued pulling her down the aisle with one foot now bare, her blood creating a sporadic trail on the cabin floor. "My briefcase," Vanessa managed through the shock, suddenly remembering the critical documents inside. "Please, I need my briefcase." Her pleas were ignored. Carol Matthews stood by the exit door, arms crossed, a satisfied expression on her face as she watched the removal. When they passed her position, she made a show of checking her watch, as if Vanessa had deliberately delayed the flight's departure. The scene in the terminal was equally horrifying. Vanessa, disoriented, bleeding, and missing a shoe, was paraded through a crowded concourse like a criminal. Bystanders stared in shock at the sight of a well-dressed black woman being manhandled by 2 white officers, blood streaming down her face. "What did she do?" someone asked loudly. "Probably assaulted someone," another responded, making an assumption based solely on the forceful removal. This casual prejudice stung almost as much as the physical pain. Throughout her life, Vanessa had worked tirelessly to be beyond reproach. Perfect grades, perfect speech, perfect professionalism, knowing any small mistake would be magnified because of her race. Now, despite all her achievements, strangers were ready to assume her guilt based on nothing but her skin color and the authorities' treatment of her. The marshals escorted her to a small security room near Gate C-17, where they finally released their grip. Vanessa stumbled forward, catching herself against a table. Blood had now dried along the side of her face and her head throbbed intensely. "I need medical attention," she stated, touching her forehead gingerly. "You'll be processed first," Donovan replied, unmoved by her condition. "Processed for what? I've committed no crime." "Interfering with flight crew duties is a federal offense," Keller informed her, already completing paperwork on a clipboard. "That's absurd. I was sitting in my assigned seat. I have rights." "You should have thought about that before causing a scene," Donovan said dismissively. For the next 3 hours, Vanessa remained detained in that room. No medical attention was offered despite her visible injury. Her requests to contact her attorney were repeatedly delayed. Most critically, without her phone or briefcase, both still on the aircraft that had long since departed, she had no way to alert her team about what had happened or her inability to make the crucial meeting. In Chicago, airport security officers took statements only from the marshals and Carol, who had left the plane specifically to file a report. No passenger witnesses were interviewed. The report, completed without Vanessa's input, described her as intoxicated. She had consumed no alcohol, and verbally abusive, directly contradicted by video evidence. When she tried to explain her identity and the importance of retrieving her briefcase, the officers treated her claims with open skepticism. "Sure, you're a CEO," one remarked sarcastically, "and I'm Jeff Bezos." The humiliation was comprehensive. Every aspect of her personhood, her professionalism, her accomplishments, her basic dignity, had been stripped away in an encounter lasting less than 30 minutes. All because she had occupied a seat she had rightfully purchased, while being black. By late afternoon, Vanessa was finally permitted to use a phone. Her first call was to Terrell Jackson, her executive assistant, who had been frantically trying to locate her after she failed to arrive in Chicago. "Terrell," she said, her voice hoarse from stress. "I need help." What would happen in the next 24 hours would transform this personal trauma into one of the most expensive acts of racial discrimination in corporate history. But for now, as Vanessa sat alone in a sterile airport security room, she was simply another Black American whose humanity had been deemed less important than white comfort. Do you believe Vanessa's treatment would have been different if she were white? Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar discrimination while traveling? Comment number 1, if you think racial bias played a role in how the airline staff responded, and keep watching to see how this situation spirals into a corporate nightmare that will cost billions. While Vanessa sat detained and isolated, events were already unfolding that would catapult her experience into the national consciousness. In economy class, Zora Williams had continued filming until the very moment Vanessa disappeared from sight. Unlike many passengers who simply posted shocking content without context, Zora's journalistic training prompted her to gather additional details. Before the plane doors closed, she quickly interviewed 3 passengers who had witnessed the entire encounter. Their testimonies, combined with her clear footage of the incident, created a compelling 12-minute video that she edited during the flight using her laptop. Upon landing in Chicago, Zora uploaded the package to multiple social media platforms with the caption, "Black woman violently removed from Skyline flight despite having correct seat. Witnesses confirm racial targeting. Skyline violence. Flying while black." The footage was unambiguous in its brutality. A composed, well-dressed Black woman presenting proper documentation, the flight attendant's dismissive attitude, the marshal's disproportionate force, and most damning, the blood streaming down Vanessa's face as she was dragged away. Within the first hour, the video accumulated 50,000 views across platforms. By the second hour, it passed 1 million. While the video spread, Skyline's social media team implemented their standard crisis protocol, a response that would prove catastrophically inadequate. At 2:17 p.m., they released a brief statement. Skyline Airlines is aware of a situation involving a disruptive passenger on Flight 11382 this morning. Safety is our priority, and our crew followed established protocols for passenger non-compliance. We are investigating the matter further. This clinical, responsibility-deflecting response only fueled public outrage. Comments flooded in by the thousands. "She had the right ticket. Your staff was wrong." "Disruptive? Black passenger who wouldn't give up her paid seat?" "Established protocols include bloodying passengers?" By 3:30 p.m., major news networks had picked up the story. Initial headlines focused on the viral video itself. Shocking footage shows woman dragged bleeding from Skyline flight. However, the narrative shifted dramatically at 4:12 p.m. when a tech industry reporter recognized Vanessa Reynolds. Breaking: woman in Skyline assault video identified as Vanessa Reynolds, CEO of RevTech, company currently negotiating $5 billion deal with Airline. This revelation transformed the story from yet another incident of airline mistreatment to a potential corporate catastrophe. Business channels immediately began speculating about the impact on both companies. Skyline's stock, which had already dipped 3% following the initial viral spread, now plunged into free fall during after-hours trading. At Skyline headquarters in Atlanta, panic ensued. CEO Richard Campbell had been in budget meetings when his communications director burst in with news of the spiraling crisis. Campbell's first reaction was disbelief, then anger at his staff for not identifying Reynolds sooner. By the time he attempted to reach Vanessa directly, she was still detained without access to her phone. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Terrell Jackson had mobilized RevTech's crisis team. After receiving Vanessa's brief call, he arranged for the company's general counsel, Dr. Aisha Patterson, to fly immediately to San Francisco. He also contacted the company's preferred medical specialist and booked a suite at the St. Regis Hotel near the airport. Get her out of there, get her medical attention, and keep the press away until we assess the situation fully, Terrell instructed the team. A former Navy intelligence officer before joining RevTech, his calm efficiency was precisely what the situation required. By early evening, the narrative had evolved yet again as reporters uncovered critical details. Thomas Whitfield's position on Skyline's board of directors, his history of questionable comments about diversity initiatives, and most significantly, his presence at the gate after Vanessa's removal, where security footage showed him speaking with Carol Matthews with what appeared to be satisfaction. At 7:45 p.m., Skyline attempted damage control with a more substantive statement. Skyline Airlines deeply regrets the incident involving Ms. Reynolds on Flight 1382. We are conducting a thorough investigation and have reached out to Ms. Reynolds directly. The employees involved have been placed on administrative leave pending review. We take allegations of discriminatory treatment extremely seriously. This statement came too late. By then, Boycott Skyline was trending nationally. Corporate clients began publicly questioning their relationships with the airline. The NAACP issued a travel advisory suggesting Black travelers exercise caution when flying with Skyline. Within the Skyline corporate offices, desperate measures were underway. Carol Matthews and Air Marshal Donovan, realizing the severity of the situation, submitted reports claiming Vanessa had appeared intoxicated and had used threatening language, allegations completely contradicted by video evidence. Their fabrications would later worsen Skyline's legal position, adding charges of defamation to the impending lawsuit. At 9:23 p.m., after receiving medical treatment for a mild concussion and facial laceration, Vanessa was finally released with a citation for interfering with flight crew duties, a charge so clearly baseless that prosecutors would dismiss it within 48 hours. Terrell and Dr. Patterson met her at the St. Regis, where the full executive team had assembled virtually via secure conference call. The RevTech leadership was unanimous. This wasn't merely a personal affront, but an attack on everything the SAO company represented. The contract signing scheduled for tomorrow. We're obviously delaying it, said Chief Financial Officer Julian West. Vanessa, despite her physical exhaustion and emotional trauma, spoke with characteristic clarity. We're not delaying it. We're reevaluating it entirely. As the night progressed, Richard Campbell called Vanessa's phone 14 times. Each call went unanswered. Skyline's stock had dropped 22% in after-hours trading, erasing nearly $4 billion in market value in less than 6 hours. Inside Vanessa's hotel suite, as ice packs reduced the swelling on her forehead and her team coordinated strategy, she reviewed Zora's video for the first time. Watching herself being treated with such brutality, not as Vanessa Reynolds, CEO, but as just another black body deemed unworthy of basic dignity, she made a decision that would reshape an entire industry. This isn't about me, she told her team as midnight approached. This happens every day to people without my resources or platform. The difference is, I'm in a position to demand systemic change. By morning, Vanessa's personal trauma would become a corporate reckoning. But unlike countless victims of similar discrimination, she possessed something rare and powerful: leverage. Dawn broke over San Francisco with Skyline Airlines facing its worst crisis in 30 years of operation. Overnight, the video of Vanessa's removal had been viewed over 40 million times globally. Morning shows across networks led with the story, many contrasting the bloody removal with Vanessa's impressive corporate biography. Financial programs focused on the $5 billion deal now hanging in the balance. Inside Skyline's Atlanta headquarters, an emergency board meeting convened at 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time. CEO Richard Campbell looked haggard after a sleepless night of crisis management. The situation is dire, he informed the assembled executives and board members, some present physically, others joining via secure video conference. Our stock will likely drop another 15 to 20% when markets open. Multiple corporate accounts have contacted us threatening to terminate their contracts. Thomas Whitfield sat stone-faced at the far end of the conference table. Though he had been identified in social media posts as the passenger involved in the initial confrontation, he had yet to be directly connected to the incident in mainstream reporting. This tenuous anonymity wouldn't last the day. "What's Reynolds asking for?" demanded Chairwoman Victoria Harrington, the only woman on Skyline's 12-person board. Campbell spread his hands in frustration. "That's the problem. She won't take my calls. Her team has gone completely dark except for a brief statement confirming she received medical treatment and is consulting with legal counsel." "Offer $20 million, suggested board member Walter Price. "Confidential settlement, non-disclosure agreement, we all move forward." General Counsel Stephen Montgomery shook his head. "I don't think you understand the magnitude here. This isn't just a customer service incident. We're potentially looking at assault, battery, false imprisonment, defamation, civil rights violations, and emotional distress. Given Reynolds' income level and the public nature of the incident, a jury could award hundreds of millions. The bigger issue," interjected Chief Marketing Officer Lisa Chen, "is the contract. $5 billion, 3 years of negotiations, all potentially lost, plus the broader reputational damage affecting all our business relationships." The discussion grew heated as executives argued over response strategies. Meanwhile, Whitfield remained conspicuously silent, checking his phone frequently. At 6:45 a.m., his expression changed noticeably upon reading a message. Across the country at the St. Regis in San Francisco, Vanessa's suite had transformed into a command center. Despite her doctor's recommendation for complete rest, she sat at the dining table surrounded by her executive team, 2 attorneys, a crisis management consultant, and 3 computer specialists. The wall-mounted television displayed continuous news coverage with the sound muted. "We've recovered your briefcase and personal items," Terrell reported. "The contract revisions are secure." Vanessa nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. The cut on her forehead had required 7 stitches, and bruising had developed around her wrists where the marshals had gripped her. "What's our legal position?" she asked Dr. Patterson, who had been conferring with outside counsel specializing in civil rights violations. "Extraordinarily strong," Patterson replied. "Beyond the obvious claims of excessive force and discrimination, we've uncovered something significant. Thomas Whitfield wasn't just randomly on that flight. He deliberately booked it after learning your travel itinerary." This revelation sent a ripple of shock through the room. Vanessa's expression remained impassive, but her eyes hardened. "Explain." Chief Technology Officer Devin Harris took over, turning his laptop screen toward the group. "We found emails between Whitfield and 3 other Skyline board members discussing the pending deal. Whitfield explicitly wrote, and I quote, 'I remain uncomfortable with the scope of control we're handing over to Reynolds' company. I question whether a firm of this background has the institutional capacity for a project of this magnitude.' The implication was clear to everyone present. Background was thinly veiled code for a black-owned business. Devin continued, "After that exchange, Whitfield accessed your travel booking through Skyline's system, which he shouldn't have been able to do, and booked himself on the same flight. There's even a text to Carol Matthews, the flight attendant, sent 30 minutes before boarding. On screen was the damning message, 'First Class 2A, we'll need your assistance with a seating issue.' The room fell silent as the full picture emerged. This hadn't been a random incident of discrimination. It had been orchestrated. "They set me up," Vanessa said quietly. "They deliberately created a situation to humiliate me before the contract signing." "That's what the evidence suggests," Dr. Patterson confirmed, "and we can prove it." At that moment, Terrell looked up from his tablet. "Campbell is calling again. That's his 18th attempt since midnight." "Let him sweat," suggested Marketing Director Serena Washington. "Their stock opens in 15 minutes. It's going to be a bloodbath." Vanessa considered her options carefully. For 20 years, she had navigated corporate America by strategically choosing her battles, often swallowing indignities to advance her larger goals. This situation demanded a different approach. "We're not just responding to this as a legal matter," she decided. "This is about systemic change. Skyline doesn't just owe me compensation, They owe a commitment to transformation. As she outlined her vision, the team quickly recognized its boldness. This wouldn't be a quiet settlement, but a public reckoning, not just for Skyline, but for corporate America's treatment of Black professionals and consumers. At 9:30 a.m. Eastern, markets opened with Skyline stock immediately dropping 27%, triggering temporary trading halts. Business channels broadcast split-screen coverage. On one side, the continuing loop of Vanessa being dragged bleeding down the airplane aisle. On the other, real-time stock tickers showing Skyline's freefall. By mid-morning, new developments compounded the crisis. 3 additional videos emerged from different passenger angles, each more damning than Zora's original footage. An internal Skyline memo leaked, showing a pattern of discriminatory treatment toward Black passengers, with documented incidents having been systematically downplayed by management. Most devastatingly, at 11:17 a.m., the Wall Street Journal published an article revealing Thomas Whitfield's direct involvement in orchestrating the confrontation. The piece included excerpts from his emails questioning RevTech's capabilities based on thinly veiled racial grounds. Inside Skyline's boardroom, the mood shifted from crisis management to survival. Richard Campbell confronted Whitfield directly. "Did you set this up? Did you deliberately target Reynolds?" Whitfield's response, "I was protecting our company's interests," sent shockwaves through the room. "By assaulting our largest potential client?" Campbell exploded. "By creating a civil rights nightmare that's destroying our stock value?" "She's not a good fit," Whitfield insisted, his true prejudices now fully exposed. "This company has traditions, standards." "Stop talking," interrupted General Counsel Montgomery. "As of this moment, you're recused from all discussions regarding this matter. I advise you to retain personal counsel immediately." By noon, Campbell finally got through to Vanessa, the desperation in his voice evident even over the phone. "Ms. Reynolds, words cannot express our regret over what happened. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation and disciplinary action against all employees involved." Vanessa's response was measured but resolute. "Mr. Campbell, I'm not interested in a payout. What happened to me happens to Black travelers every day. The difference is, I have the power to demand real change." "Whatever you want," Campbell promised hastily. "I'll see you tomorrow at the originally scheduled contract signing," Vanessa replied. "But the terms will be substantially different. My team will send the revised conditions within 3 hours." As she ended the call, Vanessa turned to her assembled executives. "They thought they could humiliate me into accepting a subordinate position. Instead, they've handed us unprecedented leverage to create real change." Across the country, 4 different airlines had already reached out through back channels, eager to discuss implementing RevTech's security systems if the Skyline deal collapsed. But Vanessa recognized something more valuable than simply switching partners: the opportunity to transform an offender into an example of what corporate accountability could actually look like. Have you ever been in a situation where the tables completely turned, where someone who tried to harm you suddenly found themselves at your mercy? Comment number 1 if you believe in karma, and hit that like button if you think corporations should face real consequences for discrimination. Now watch how Vanessa Reynolds transforms from victim to changemaker in one of the most masterful power reversals in business history. The St. Regis suite had transformed from crisis center to strategic command. Maps, charts, and data visualizations covered the walls. 3 additional legal experts had joined remotely. Vanessa, despite her physical discomfort, radiated focus and determination. "We have a unique opportunity," she told her assembled team. "Skyline is desperate. Their stock has lost 34% of its value in less than 24 hours. Corporate clients are fleeing. They'll agree to almost anything to stop the bleeding. The typical playbook would be to negotiate a large settlement with a confidentiality agreement," noted Dr. Patterson. "That would certainly maximize immediate financial compensation." Vanessa shook her head. "That's exactly what they want, to pay me off and bury this. To make it about one unfortunate incident rather than their entire corporate culture." Instead, Vanessa outlined a revolutionary approach. Rather than seeking personal enrichment, she would leverage this moment to demand comprehensive structural changes within Skyline, changes that would benefit countless future travelers and employees. "We're not settling," she declared. "We're reforming." Within hours, the strategy took shape. RevTech would proceed with the security contract, but with substantial new provisions focused on equity and accountability, Skyline would be required to 1. Implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, from executives to ground crews. 2. Establish clear protocols prohibiting discriminatory treatment of passengers, with real consequences for violations. 3. Create a diverse oversight board with actual authority to investigate complaints. 4. Revise hiring and promotion practices to increase representation at all levels. 5. Fund scholarships for Black students pursuing aviation careers. 6. Publicly acknowledge the incident and commit to measurable improvement metrics. Most significantly, Vanessa insisted these changes be publicly announced and independently monitored, with financial penalties for non-compliance built into the contract itself. "They'll never agree to all this," warned CFO Julian West. "It's too far-reaching." "They can't afford not to," countered Terrell. "Their choice is between transformation or bankruptcy." While the team finalized these demands, Vanessa made a decision that surprised even her closest advisors. Instead of continuing to avoid the press, she would hold a press conference that afternoon. Not from hiding, but from a position of strength. "No prepared statement, no public relations buffer," she instructed. "I'll answer questions directly and honestly. The world needs to see that I'm not broken or intimidated." At 3 p.m. Pacific time, Vanessa stood before a forest of microphones in a conference room at the St. Regis. The bruising on her face was visible despite makeup. She had declined suggestions to conceal her injuries. "Yesterday morning I boarded a Skyline flight as a first-class passenger with a valid ticket," she began, her voice steady. "I left that aircraft with a concussion, a facial laceration requiring 7 stitches, and bruises around my wrists. Not because I did anything wrong, but because when a white man wanted my seat, the system automatically assumed I was the problem." For 20 minutes, she recounted the events with clinical precision, neither downplaying the humiliation nor exhibiting self-pity. When she opened the floor to questions, reporters were struck by her composure. "Are you planning to sue Skyline?" asked a CNN correspondent. "This isn't about litigation," Vanessa replied. "It's about transformation. Skyline has an opportunity to become a model for corporate accountability, and I'm offering them that path forward." "Would you have been treated differently if you were white?" asked another reporter bluntly. "The evidence speaks for itself," she answered. "Thomas Whitfield targeted me specifically. His emails reveal concerns about my company's background, not our capabilities, which are world-class, but our identity as a Black-owned business." The most powerful moment came when asked if she felt angry. "Of course I'm angry," Vanessa acknowledged, "but I've turned that anger into purpose. What happened to me is experienced by Black Americans every day, usually without the corporate leverage or resources I possess. I'm using my position to create change that will benefit others who don't have my platform." The press conference transformed the narrative. Rather than appearing as a victim seeking compensation, Vanessa emerged as a visionary leader, turning personal injustice into institutional reform. Social media exploded with support, Vanessa Reynolds' leadership trending alongside the boycott Skyline. Meanwhile, inside RevTech, Terrell had made a surprising discovery while coordinating with the legal team. "Vanessa, we found something. The flight attendant, Carol Matthews, has a history. 17 complaints of discriminatory treatment over her career, all against passengers of color, all buried by management." Further investigation revealed that Air Marshal Donovan had been subject to 3 excessive force complaints, also involving minority passengers. None had resulted in disciplinary action. Most significantly, Devon's team uncovered a pattern in Skyline's internal communications. Issues raised by Black passengers were routinely categorized as customer misunderstandings rather than service failures, with different resolution protocols than those applied to complaints from white customers. This evidence strengthened Vanessa's position immeasurably. It transformed the incident from an isolated occurrence to evidence of systemic problems, exactly what Skyline was most desperate to avoid acknowledging. By evening, As Vanessa prepared to fly to Chicago on a competitor airline for tomorrow's meeting, her phone rang with an unexpected caller. Victoria Harrington, the lone female Skyline board member. "Ms. Reynolds, this is highly irregular, but I felt compelled to reach out," Harrington began. "What happened to you reflects a culture that some of us have been trying to change from within for years. Your leverage might accomplish what we couldn't." This insider confirmation validated Vanessa's approach. The problem wasn't just individual bad actors, but institutional structures that enabled discrimination while shielding the company from accountability. As Vanessa boarded her flight to Chicago, a different dynamic was unfolding. Rather than being anonymous, she was instantly recognized by crew and passengers alike. The captain personally welcomed her aboard. Fellow travelers offered supportive words and fist bumps of solidarity. In less than 36 hours, she had transformed from a victim of discrimination to a symbol of resilience and principled leadership. Now, as her plane took off for Chicago, she prepared for a negotiation unlike any in corporate history, one where moral authority and market leverage aligned perfectly. Meanwhile, in Skyline's headquarters, Richard Campbell received the list of demands from RevTech's legal team. His face paled as he read through the comprehensive requirements. These weren't simple concessions. They represented a fundamental reimagining of the company's culture and practices. "They can't be serious," he muttered. But the plummeting stock price on his monitor told him they were deadly serious indeed. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The question was no longer what Skyline would offer Vanessa Reynolds, but whether she would still offer Skyline a path to redemption at her price. "Do you think more companies would change discriminatory practices if they faced real financial consequences? Have you seen other examples where public pressure forced institutional change?" Keep watching to see how Vanessa Reynolds turns corporate America upside down. Chicago awakened to news that Vanessa Reynolds had arrived in the city overnight, proceeding with the scheduled contract meeting despite her traumatic experience. Business channels speculated wildly about what this meant for the deal. Would she publicly denounce Skyline? Announce a partnership with a competitor? The $5 billion question hung in the air as markets prepared to open. At the Peninsula Hotel, Vanessa put the finishing touches on her presentation. She had slept surprisingly well, the clarity of purpose acting as a balm for her physical discomfort. Her team had arranged for a skilled makeup artist to conceal the worst of her bruising, though she intentionally left the stitched cut partially visible, a reminder of what had precipitated this meeting. "The latest from Skyline," Terrell reported, entering her suite with a tablet. "Their stock is down 42% since the incident. 3 major corporate clients have suspended their relationships pending review of diversity practices. 6 executives have sold significant shares overnight." Vanessa nodded, unsurprised. "And Campbell?" "Practically begging for this meeting. Their PR team has drafted 3 different statements, all basically throwing Whitfield under the bus while portraying the incident as anomalous." "Which we know it isn't," Vanessa replied, adjusting her crimson blazer. The color choice was deliberate, powerful, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. "Have the additional revisions been incorporated into the contract?" Dr. Patterson nodded. "Everything as you specified. The diversity requirements are legally binding, with financial penalties for non-compliance. The Independent Oversight Committee has real authority, and the public acknowledgement requirement is non-negotiable." At 9 a.m. precisely, Vanessa and her team arrived at Skyline's Chicago offices. The reception was markedly different from their previous visits. Staff appeared nervous, overly solicitous. The tension was palpable as they were escorted to the executive conference room. Richard Campbell waited with his leadership team, minus Thomas Whitfield, who had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Campbell's typically confident demeanor had given way to visible anxiety. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. "Ms. Reynolds," he began, extending his hand, which Vanessa briefly shook. "Words cannot express our regret over what happened. I want to personally assure you that the individuals involved have been suspended, and we're conducting a thorough investigation." "An investigation into an incident captured on multiple videos seems unnecessary," Vanessa observed, coolly taking her seat. "But we're not here to discuss apologies. We're here to discuss transformation." For the next 40 minutes, Vanessa controlled the room completely. Rather than emotional appeals, she presented data, statistics on discrimination in air travel, documentation of Skyline's previous incidents, analysis of their corporate culture compared to industry standards. Her approach was methodical, irrefutable, and devastating. Skyline doesn't merely have an incident problem, she concluded. You have a systemic problem, one that cost me my dignity 2 days ago and is now costing your shareholders billions in value. Campbell and his team sat in uncomfortable silence. Their prepared responses, centered around individual misconduct rather than institutional failure, suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation, Campbell finally said. And of course, disciplinary action against the employees involved. Vanessa allowed a moment of silence before responding. Mr. Campbell, I'm not interested in hush money. What happened to me happens to black travelers constantly, usually without recourse. The difference is I have leverage that others don't. She nodded to Terrell, who distributed tablets containing RevTech's revised contract. As Skyline executives scrolled through the document, their expressions ranged from disbelief to resignation. These terms are unprecedented, sputtered Chief Legal Officer Stephen Montgomery. The diversity requirements alone would transform our entire organizational structure. Precisely, Vanessa affirmed. That's the point. Campbell attempted to negotiate. Some of these provisions would take years to implement fully, which is why we've included clear timelines and benchmarks, Vanessa countered, with financial incentives for early achievement and penalties for delays. For 2 hours, they dissected the contract point by point. Throughout, Vanessa remained resolute. This wasn't a negotiation in the traditional sense. It was a recalibration of power. Skyline could accept these terms or watch their company's value continue to plummet. Just before noon, an unexpected interruption occurred. Thomas Whitfield entered the room unannounced, his face flushed with anger. "This is extortion," he declared, pointing at Vanessa. "She's using an unfortunate customer service incident to force a radical agenda on our company." The room froze. Campbell looked mortified. "Thomas, you're not authorized to be here. You've been placed on leave pending investigation." "Investigation?" Whitfield scoffed. "There's nothing to investigate. She was uncooperative with flight staff and created a disruption. The response may have been overzealous, but—" "Mr. Whitfield," Vanessa interrupted, her voice deadly calm. "Are you referring to the incident you deliberately orchestrated? The one where you accessed my travel records, booked yourself on my flight, then pretended my assigned seat was yours? The one where you texted Carol Matthews in advance to ensure her cooperation?" The blood drained from Whitfield's face. "That's absurd. You have no proof?" "Actually," interjected Devin Harris, RevTech's CTO, "we have extensive documentation. Your emails discussing concerns about our company's background. Your access log in Skyline's system reviewing Ms. Reynolds' travel itinerary. Your text messages to Carol Matthews. Would you like me to continue?" Whitfield's expression shifted, from indignation to panic. Other Skyline executives stared at him in horror, suddenly understanding that their crisis was even worse than they'd realized. "Furthermore," added Dr. Patterson, "we've identified 17 previous complaints against Ms. Matthews for discriminatory treatment of passengers of color, all buried by management. This isn't about one unfortunate incident. It's about a pattern of behavior your company has systematically enabled." Campbell turned to Whitfield, fury evident in his expression. "You did this deliberately? You created this entire situation?" Before Whitfield could respond, the conference room door opened again. Zora Williams entered, escorted by Serena Washington, from RevTech's marketing team. "Who are you?" demanded Campbell. "This is a private meeting." "This is Zora Williams," Vanessa explained, "the journalism graduate who recorded the initial video of my removal. She's been conducting follow-up interviews with other passengers. Ms. Williams, would you like to share what you've discovered?" Zora stepped forward confidently. "I have statements from 12 passengers confirming Ms. Reynolds was completely professional throughout the encounter. I also have footage not yet released publicly showing Mr. Whitfield speaking with Carol Matthews before boarding, appearing to give her instructions. Most importantly, I have a recording from a passenger seated behind Mr. Whitfield who overheard him say, and I quote, "These people need to learn their place." The room fell silent. Whitfield's face contorted with a mixture of rage and fear. Without another word, he turned and stormed out. Campbell watched him go, then turned back to Vanessa with new understanding. "We'll sign the revised contract. All of it." 3 hours later, the agreement was finalized. Beyond the original $5 billion security implementation, Skyline committed to 1. Establishing a passenger equity council with binding authority over discrimination complaints. 2. Implementing company-wide anti-bias training developed and led by diversity experts. 3. Creating hiring and promotion targets for underrepresented groups at all levels. 4. Funding a $10 million scholarship program for Black students in aviation. Publicly acknowledging the discriminatory treatment and committing to measurable improvement. Most significantly, these commitments would be publicly announced and independently monitored, with financial penalties for non-compliance. As Vanessa signed the final document, she felt no triumph, only the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about one incident or one company. It was about using her position to create ripples that would benefit countless others who lacked her platform and resources. "This isn't the end," she told Campbell as they concluded. "It's the beginning of Skyline becoming an example for corporate America, proof that accountability and equity aren't just moral imperatives, but business necessities." As news of the agreement broke, Skyline stock began to stabilize. Financial analysts, initially skeptical, noted that the company's commitment to structural reform might actually strengthen its long-term position. The transparency requirements, while unprecedented, signaled serious intent to address issues that could otherwise have led to further incidents and damage. By evening, the story had evolved from corporate scandal to potential watershed moment. Other airlines began proactively reviewing their own diversity practices and complaint procedures. Industry publications speculated about the Reynolds effect, whether this single incident might catalyze broader change throughout the sector. For Vanessa personally, the resolution brought no instant healing. The physical injuries would fade, but the memory of being dragged bleeding through an airport while strangers assumed her guilt would linger. Yet she had transformed that trauma into something powerful, a mechanism for change that extended far beyond her individual experience. As she prepared to return to San Francisco that evening, Vanessa received an unexpected message. Victoria Harrington, the Skyline board member who had reached out previously, informed her that an emergency board meeting had been called. Thomas Whitfield had been removed from his position, effective immediately. An investigation into Carol Matthews' history of discriminatory behavior had been expanded to include all customer-facing staff with similar complaint patterns. The wheels of change had begun turning, faster than anyone might have anticipated. The power had shifted not just for Vanessa personally, but potentially for all those who would come after her. The following morning, newspapers across the country featured Vanessa Reynolds on their front pages. Headlines ranged from "Black CEO Transforms Corporate Discrimination into Industry Reform" to "How One Woman's Humiliation Became a $5 billion Lesson in Accountability." Business schools were already developing case studies on what professors were calling the most expensive act of discrimination in corporate history. At RevTech headquarters in San Francisco, employees greeted Vanessa with standing applause as she entered the building. Though she had initially planned to take time off to recover, the momentum of events demanded her presence. This wasn't simply about resolving an incident, but about seizing a historic opportunity for institutional change. "The contract is signed," she informed her assembled leadership team. "But implementation is where real change happens. Skyline agreed to our terms because they had no choice. Now we ensure they fulfill those commitments not just in letter, but in spirit." The strategy session focused on establishing concrete metrics for measuring Skyline's progress. Vanessa insisted on transparency requirements that would allow independent verification of everything from hiring practices to passenger complaint resolutions. "They'll try to minimize this," predicted Dr. Patterson. "Their PR team is already framing it as an isolated incident caused by rogue employees." Which is precisely why we included the public acknowledgement requirement, Vanessa responded. Campbell delivers that statement today at 2 o'clock. No vague corporate speak, no passive voice removing accountability. A clear admission of systemic problems and specific commitments to address them. Across the country in Atlanta, Richard Campbell prepared for what would likely be the most challenging press conference of his career. Skyline's communications team had drafted 7 different versions of his statement, each attempting to balance accountability with damage control. None had satisfied Campbell, who recognized that half measures would only prolong the crisis. At 1:15 p.m. Eastern, 45 minutes before his scheduled appearance, Campbell requested a private video call with Vanessa. The board is pushing back on some of the statement language, he admitted, looking exhausted. Particularly the acknowledgement of systemic discrimination and the commitment to racial equity audits. They're concerned about legal exposure and shareholder reactions. Vanessa's expression remained impassive. Those elements aren't negotiable, Mr. Campbell. They're central to the agreement we signed yesterday. I understand that, he said, but perhaps we could modify the language too. Let me be very clear, Vanessa interrupted. Any attempt to water down these commitments will be considered a breach of our agreement. RevTech will immediately withdraw from the contract and pursue all available legal remedies for the assault, battery, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations I experienced. Additionally, we'll release all documentation showing Thomas Whitfield's deliberate orchestration of the incident and your company's history of burying discrimination complaints. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Or, you can honor our agreement, acknowledge the issues honestly, and position Skyline as a leader in corporate accountability, your choice. The ultimatum hung between them. Campbell knew she wasn't bluffing. The financial consequences of contract termination would be catastrophic, far worse than whatever discomfort the board felt about acknowledging uncomfortable truths. I'll deliver the statement as agreed, he conceded. At precisely 2 p.m., Campbell stood before a forest of microphones at Skyline headquarters. Behind him hung the company's logo, an image that had become synonymous with racial discrimination. Over the past 72 hours, his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his prepared remarks. 2 days ago, Vanessa Reynolds, CEO of RevTech, was forcibly and wrongfully removed from Skyline Flight 1382, he began. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or procedural error. Evidence indicates it was a deliberate act of discrimination, enabled by systemic failures within our organization. In boardrooms across the country, executives watched in astonishment as Campbell acknowledged specific patterns of discrimination in Skyline's practices, detailed the corrective measures being implemented, and committed to public accountability through independently verified progress reports. We cannot undo the injustice Ms. Reynolds experienced, he concluded, but we can ensure it creates lasting change. Skyline is committed to becoming the industry standard for equitable treatment of all passengers and employees, regardless of race, gender, or background. This isn't just a legal settlement, but a fundamental recommitment to basic human dignity. As Campbell fielded questions, it became evident that this wasn't the typical corporate damage control. The specificity of commitments, the acceptance of independent oversight, and the lack of equivocation marked a significant departure from how companies typically handled discrimination claims. Meanwhile, at Skyline's Chicago offices, Terrell Jackson supervised the installation of RevTech's security systems, the original purpose of the contract that had precipitated this entire situation. Engineers who had expected a routine technical implementation found themselves part of a historic corporate transformation. Is it true, one Skyline IT manager asked Terrell, that part of the new security protocol includes tracking discrimination, complaints, and preventing them from being buried in the system? That's correct, Terrell confirmed. The system flags patterns of complaints against specific employees or at specific locations, preventing the kind of statistical manipulation that allowed Carol Matthews to accumulate 17 discrimination complaints without consequences. Word of this feature spread quickly through the company. Employees who had witnessed problematic behavior but feared reporting it now saw a mechanism for accountability that didn't depend on the discretion of individual managers. By evening, Campbell's unequivocal statement and the detailed reform commitments had begun shifting market perception. Skyline's stock, which had lost nearly half its value following the incident, stabilized and even regained 7% in after-hours trading. Analysts noted that while the company faced significant short-term costs for implementing these changes, the long-term benefits of avoiding similar incidents and building a more inclusive culture could outweigh them. More surprisingly, 3 competing airlines contacted RevTech about implementing similar oversight systems, recognizing that Skyline's crisis could easily have been their own. The industry-wide vulnerability to discrimination claims and their potential financial impact had suddenly become a top priority risk management issue. At RevTech headquarters, Vanessa received another unexpected call, this time from the White House. The president's senior advisor on economic equity requested a meeting to discuss how the Skyline agreement might serve as a template for broader corporate accountability measures. "This is bigger than one company or one incident," the advisor explained. "You've created a blueprint for how market forces can drive social change when the affected parties have sufficient leverage." Vanessa agreed to the meeting while reflecting on the advisor's observation. Leverage was precisely what most victims of discrimination lacked. Her unique position, as both a victim of blatant racism and the CEO of a company Skyline desperately needed, had created this opportunity. The challenge now was extending those protections to people without her resources or platform. Late that night, as Vanessa finally allowed herself to rest, she received a text message from Zora Williams, the young journalist whose video had catalyzed the national response. "Just interviewed 2 flight attendants who say they've witnessed similar incidents for years but feared reporting them. They're speaking out now because of you. This is changing things from the inside." This, Vanessa reflected, was the true measure of impact, not the contract value or the stock market response, but the empowerment of those who had previously felt voiceless. The transformation had begun, not just on paper, but in the lived experiences of real people. Tomorrow would bring the formal announcement of Skyline's new Passenger Equity Council, with Vanessa having the unprecedented authority to approve its initial members. What had begun as her personal humiliation was becoming a systemic reformation, one that would outlast the news cycle and potentially change an entire industry's approach to racial equity. 6 months later, Vanessa Reynolds stood in Skyline's newly renovated training center in Atlanta, observing a session of the anti-bias program that all 27,000 employees would complete by year's end. The instructor, a respected civil rights educator hired under the new initiatives, guided participants through scenarios based on actual incidents, including Vanessa's own experience. What structural factors allowed this situation to escalate? The instructor asked the room of flight attendants and gate agents. What intervention points existed before it reached physical removal? The discussion that followed was thoughtful, sometimes uncomfortable, but fundamentally different from the superficial diversity training many corporations implemented as window dressing. This program required participants to examine not just individual behaviors, but the systems that enabled discrimination. After the session, Vanessa met with Richard Campbell in what had become their monthly implementation review. The relationship remained formal, but had developed a foundation of cautious respect. "The passenger complaint metrics are showing promising trends," Campbell reported, displaying a dashboard on the conference room screen. "Discrimination-related reports are down 32% overall, and those filed by passengers of color have decreased by 47%. "And how many were substantiated?" Vanessa asked, focusing on the accountability aspect that corporations typically avoided. 18%, which is actually higher than before, indicating more legitimate issues are being reported while frivolous complaints have decreased. Of those substantiated, 100% received follow-up action within the mandated 72-hour window. This represented significant progress. Prior to the incident, Skyline had no consistent process for addressing discrimination, complaints with many languishing unresolved for months or being dismissed without investigation. "The hiring and promotion numbers?" Vanessa inquired, turning to another key metric. Campbell displayed the next slide, We've increased Black representation in leadership roles from 4% to 11%, with similar improvements across other underrepresented groups. The executive team is now 23% people of color, up from 8%. We're slightly behind target on supervisory positions, but have implemented the accelerated development program you recommended to address that gap. The transformation extended beyond statistics. Throughout Skyline's operations, subtle but meaningful changes were visible. More diverse faces in company materials, revised protocols for passenger disputes that required supervisor involvement before security could be called, a confidential reporting system for employees who witnessed discriminatory behavior. Most significantly, Carol Matthews and Air Marshal Donovan had been terminated rather than merely suspended. An investigation uncovered dozens of additional incidents involving both individuals, creating a clear pattern that could no longer be ignored. Their removal sent an unmistakable message throughout the company. Discrimination carried real consequences, regardless of seniority. Thomas Whitfield faced more serious repercussions. After evidence of his deliberate orchestration of the incident became public, shareholders filed a derivative lawsuit against him for breach of fiduciary duty, arguing his actions had directly caused billions in losses. Additionally, federal authorities opened an investigation into potential civil rights violations, which remained ongoing. For Vanessa personally, the aftermath brought complex emotions. The physical wounds had healed, but certain triggers remained. The sound of footsteps behind her in a confined space, unexpected physical contact, the particular announcements tone used on aircraft. Yet she had channeled these responses into creating systemic safeguards that would protect others. "There's one more development you should know about," Campbell said as their meeting concluded. "The Passenger Equity Council reviewed historical complaint data as you recommended. They identified 8 former passengers who experienced similar discriminatory removal, but lacked the resources to pursue meaningful recourse. The Council has authorized compensation and formal apologies to each." This, to Vanessa, represented the most meaningful progress, acknowledgement and restitution for those whose experiences had previously been dismissed. After leaving Skyline headquarters, Vanessa visited the Atlanta office of RevTech, which had expanded significantly following the security contract implementation. Among the new employees was Zora Williams, who had joined the communications team after her graduation. "The industry report is finished," Zora informed her, providing a tablet with the document. First comprehensive analysis of discrimination patterns across major airlines, with comparative metrics on complaint resolution and passenger outcomes. The report, funded by the foundation Vanessa had established with a portion of the contract proceeds, would be released publicly the following week. Its findings would create accountability not just for Skyline, but for the entire industry. "Perfect timing," Vanessa noted. "The Congressional Committee has requested it for their hearings on passenger rights legislation." What had begun as a personal traumatic experience had catalyzed policy discussions at the federal level. The proposed legislation would establish industry-wide standards for passenger treatment and create meaningful penalties for discriminatory practices. That evening, Vanessa boarded a Skyline flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, her first time flying with the airline since the incident. The decision to use Skyline rather than a competitor was deliberate, a personal test of whether meaningful change had occurred. The difference was immediately apparent. The check-in agent recognized her name but maintained professional courtesy without excessive deference. The gate staff processed her boarding with the same efficiency they showed all passengers. On board, the flight attendant, a Black woman who had been hired during the recent recruitment initiative, welcomed her by name but without making a spectacle of her presence. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, some of you may recognize a special passenger with us today. Vanessa Reynolds' experience with our airline 6 months ago sparked the most significant reforms in our company's history. Those changes have made Skyline not just a safer place for passengers of all backgrounds, but a better company overall. Ms. Reynolds, on behalf of our entire team, thank you for holding us accountable and showing us a better path forward." Spontaneous applause broke out throughout the cabin. Several passengers reached across aisles to shake Vanessa's hand or simply nod in recognition of what her stand had accomplished. In that moment, Vanessa reflected on how a 30-second video of her degradation had transformed into a movement for lasting change. The humiliation she had experienced, blood streaming down her face as she was dragged through an aircraft cabin, had been weaponized not for vengeance, but for reformation. The settlement could have been simple: a large payment, a private apology, business as usual. Instead, it had become a template for how corporate accountability for discrimination could work: specific commitments, independent verification, transparent reporting, and structural changes rather than symbolic gestures. As the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, Vanessa opened her tablet to review the latest implementation metrics from Skyline. The numbers told a story of genuine transformation, complaints down, diverse hiring up, response times improved, accountability mechanisms functioning as designed. This wasn't the end of discrimination in air travel or corporate America more broadly. Centuries of systemic inequality couldn't be dismantled in 6 months, but it represented something powerful. Proof that when those with leverage used it, not just for personal redress, but for structural change, real progress became possible. For Vanessa Reynolds, the journey had come full circle. The same airline that had dragged her bleeding from an aircraft was now implementing equity measures that would protect countless passengers who would never know her name. The security systems her company had developed were now complemented by human systems designed to recognize and respect the dignity of every person who stepped aboard. As the wheels touched down on the San Francisco runway, Vanessa made a decision. The foundation she had established would expand its mission, identifying other industries where similar leverage points could create systemic change. The methodology developed with Skyline could be adapted for hotels, healthcare, financial services, anywhere discrimination persisted behind corporate facades of inclusion. What began with blood on an airplane aisle had become a blueprint for transformation. Not merely compensation for past wrongs, but reconstruction of the systems that allowed those wrongs to occur in the first place. Not just justice for one CEO with unusual leverage, but a pathway to equity for everyone who would come after her. That, Vanessa reflected as the aircraft taxied to the gate, was worth far more than $5 billion. What's your reaction to Vanessa's story? Do you believe corporate America can truly change? Or will it take more stories like hers to create lasting transformation? Comment below with your thoughts, hit that like button if you found this story powerful, and subscribe for more true stories that expose injustice and celebrate those who fight back. Share this video with someone who needs to understand why representation and accountability matter. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most painful moments become the catalyst for the most meaningful change. Vanessa Reynolds' story teaches us that true power comes not from seeking personal revenge, but from creating systemic change. When faced with blatant discrimination, she transformed her humiliation into a blueprint for corporate accountability. The incident shows how quickly power dynamics can shift when injustice is exposed and documented in our digital age. This case demonstrates that meaningful change requires more than empty apologies or symbolic gestures. It demands concrete actions, measurable metrics, and independent verification. Corporations must address not just individual bad actors, but the systems that enable discriminatory behavior to flourish unchecked. Perhaps most importantly, the story reveals how those with privilege and platform can use their position to create pathways for others without similar resources. Vanessa could have settled for personal compensation, but instead leveraged her unique position to establish protections that would benefit countless future travelers. The transformation of Skyline Airlines proves that corporate America can change, but only when financial consequences align with moral imperatives. When discrimination impacts the bottom line, businesses find ways to address problems they've ignored for decades. What's your reaction to Vanessa's powerful stand against discrimination? Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar treatment while traveling or in other aspects of daily life? Comment below with your stories or thoughts on how we can hold corporations accountable. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives about everyday heroes standing up against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how discrimination still shapes lives in America today. Thank you for listening and being part of this important conversation. Remember, Sometimes our most painful moments can become the catalyst for the most meaningful change, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us.